Cut content has been the subject of many discussions within the Valve community over the years, ranging from the extremely different in tone earlier versions of Half-Life 2 to Left 4 Dead's many iterations. This company has created probably some of the most interesting betas and messed around with some really interesting concepts that quite didn't make it to the final game. And much like many of the games that came before it from Valve, Deadlock is one of them. Hello everyone, Sleep here, and welcome to Dead Leaks, a series where I delve into Deadlock's leaks and data mines to discuss old cut content along with potential future stuff in this game. In today's first ever episode of the series, I want to do a bit of a deep dive and delve into one of the most interesting yet shrouded in mystery topics in regard to data mine content. This being the earlier science fiction iteration of Deadlock called Neon Prime. Now before I continue, I must preface this with the fact that I will not be covering absolutely everything this iteration of the game had to offer in this specific episode, and later on into this video I will touch on some potential reasoning and rumors behind what may have led to the decision to move on from this direction and some of the future stuff coming to the game as we know it. On top of that, I want to give a huge thanks to the hip modding Deadlock Discord for the amount of effort and time they've put into archiving and discovering all this. If you've seen any data mines and leaks in regards to the game, it is likely from the server and because of the amount of passion they have for this stuff. A huge part of why I decided to do this series was because I was frustrated they were not getting proper credit. I also want to give a very big thanks to Lamarrite from the Discord for helping me fact check and get further info on certain subjects. But that's enough talking, and let's get into it. So before we get into the actual contents of Neon Prime, I think it's necessary we talk about the importance Neon Prime had within the lead up to Deadlock's semi-official reveal. To many following the constant string of leaks seemingly coming out of Valve, there was often mentions of a project called Citadel a couple years back throughout various data mines people would perform on stuff such as Dota and Counter-Strike updates that would often ship with files calling for and referencing systems and code from various types of sources. Most notably, looking through stuff like this led to the discovery of projects like HLVR, which would be the internal name for Half-Life Alyx years before it would actually be officially revealed. Much like Alyx, this Project Citadel was mentioned alongside stuff like the currently unannounced Project HLX, and speculation regarding this project grew as information leaked out through both official and insider sources. Notably, this Citadel project was seemingly the project that had been in the works since 2018, briefly mentioned at the end of the final hours of Half-Life Alyx, and official documentation and retrospective of material from the game's development by Jeff Keighley of the Game Awards fame. Initially, the game was seemingly a weird asymmetrical game akin to something like Dead by Daylight or Evolve, in which one player would be playing in VR while the other would be playing on PC. The game would seemingly feature stuff like a secondary type of ammo, which currently is not in the available version of Deadlock, alongside a mini-map, jumping, and mantling systems. Setting-wise, the game was also looking to have a bit of a Combine influence, which makes sense considering how important the Citadel was in the grand plan within the takeover of Earth and Half-Life 2's plot. All of this seemingly pointed hard towards this asymmetrical VR cross-platform project that had staggering similarities to a project mentioned in an interview YouTuber Tyler McVicker had with an ex-Valve employee, Jerry Ellsworth, in which someone would basically play God spawning in waves of zombies and health packs across the map within a version of Left 4 Dead against another player playing normally.
It's amazing. Like, we took Left 4 Dead and we hacked it apart and took the director out of it, and we were using a wand and we were letting one person sit on the couch while someone else played on the TV. And the person on the couch sitting next to him was dropping health packs and zombies into the map while their friend played on the TV. It was insanely fun. And it's like, yeah, this is the future right here.
Eventually, the name of this project would shift publicly around the time of a new copyright registry in which the project was now being called Neon Prime. Reports started to come out, mostly from Tyler McVicker, claiming this project was now a class-based third-person mobile-like competitive shooter. The game seemingly had shifted to the main goal of destroying this iteration's version of the Patron, with elements of stuff like destructible environments now seen in stuff like Marvel Rivals and Teardown, along with elements of the Combine existing within the setting of this world. There was seemingly a mechanic around someone being the commander of the team who would have an immense influence on plays, along with a train system which would, much like the current game's zip lines, be a way to navigate the map quicker. There were mentions of creeps in the game having similar functionality to what they do now, but with the added twist of them having some sort of crafting system you can engage with using materials from said creeps. Most interesting of all, this iteration of the game was seemingly getting ready for a full-on public release, with the copyright for Neon Prime being updated to be used for commercial use. Of course, this would never come to be, as Deadlock would not be publicly acknowledged by Valve for almost an entire year after, and a huge shift in tone, characters, and setting. But how different was a Neon Prime to the game we have now with Deadlock? Well, luckily for us, Valve left enough of this iteration of the game within the current game of Deadlock, so let's go point by point and talk about it. Obviously, the biggest difference between Deadlock and Neon Prime is setting, but it goes beyond just simple visual differences. The world of Neon Prime in lore took place in the city of Fracture, an Australian-esque society with a planet once used to banish prisoners turned into a bustling city. But in a twist, these prisoners kept up their criminal ways and built a society all around crime. Here's a little sample of how the city markets itself. Welcome, intergalactic tourists, to Fracture, city of 1,000 cities. As you walk down our many historic streets and enjoy our countless parks and museums, you may think that Fracture is just like any other bustling planet capital in the galaxy, and in most ways it is. But in other tiny but important ways, Fracture is one of a kind. As for instance, if you got off the shuttle at the Bowl of Blood spaceport, you probably got robbed. But not for all your money, around 34%, and you were given a receipt. Then you started yelling for the police and you got robbed again. That's because Fracture is run by criminals. Now, that might sound like a bad idea, but if you read on, you'll find out it's actually one of the best darn ways a city could be run, fine-tuned by centuries of illegality. Some of the playable characters in this version of Neon Prime have a lot of lore similarities to their current iterations. Take for example the hatred-filled rivalry between Bebop and Lash remaining relatively the same, or Paradox still being the same kind of criminal organization we have currently, but with their specific member we play as being their leader Chrono. But what is actually going on in the game with Neon Prime to cause whatever conflict given as an excuse for the players to fight? Deadlock is a story of two groups fighting for the sake of getting their wishes granted through the patrons, so what exactly is happening in Neon Prime? Well, Neon Prime is actually about two groups fighting in a blood sport in an attempt to get their mayor elected. Here's how the game describes the premise. Going forward, mayoral elections will be settled by a single knockdown, drag-out fight in the city center. Winner takes all. Each candidate meets with all the boroughs they're in bed with and selects 6 champions to represent them in a fight. Now, these 6 representatives might not like each other. In fact, they might have plenty of good reason to kill each other. But if they all want their favors, kickbacks, and special treatments their candidates promised them, that mayor needs to win. So for one day only, they'd better work together. Digging through the textures also feeds into the general early 2000s, late 90s Cowboy Bebop-esque vibe the game was really aiming for, with various ads featuring this kind of neo-Japanese, semi-skateboarder-esque art, with splashes of this Eastern-looking text that feeds into this vibe super well. Fun fact too actually, we through some of these ads could actually see some of the Combine connections I mentioned earlier when the game was being leaked as Citadel. I just found that kinda neat when I was going through a lot of the leaks regarding the textures and stuff. So now that we know about some of the world building and lore differences between the current Deadlock and Neon Prime, let's delve into an aspect that might interest a lot of you. Deadlock, much like Neon Prime, had the same kind of premise. Take out towers, destroy walkers, farm creeps, and kill the big thing at the end. It's a MOBA through and through, but what made Neon Prime different were some gameplay details. Take for example that Neon Prime's version of taking on the patron has you instead fighting a big titan protecting a core that would grant your team the win. What makes this encounter specifically a lot more different was the approach of having some areas of Neon Prime's development not having shrines, which very much changes how you'd likely take on the transition from moving to a different lane after taking out a walker. This also somewhat ties into the way slots were handled, because currently Deadlock has a total of 16 item slots for you to put items into, 12 of which are specifically category focused so that you can get 4 of each item type at the beginning of the game, and progressively unlocking an additional 4 slots that have any type of item in them by completing objectives like shrines. This very much would change how the dynamic of games are played currently on a macro level. Another dynamic that was severely different in Neon Prime was the way that the melee system worked. As it currently stands, the melee system in Deadlock is all about fake outs and reads, with you trying to mix the opponent with a devastating huge melee attack while having the risk of being parried into a stun that leaves you open to devastating damage. Neon Prime still has this dynamic, but the punishment for messing up your parry was seemingly a lot more painful and left you open to a melee combo, and this system I kind of like. Obviously, the punishment now is a lot more simpler to get a grasp on, and making you have to do a whole ass fighting game combo was probably a bit much considering how much stuff there already is going on in this game anyway, but I would love to see a character built around melee combos or something like this in the future. It could be pretty neat and unique to this game in terms of hero design. Which reminds me... So while I'm not going to be able to cover absolutely everything in regards to this specific section of the Neon Prime topic, both due to the sheer amount of content there is to go through and the fact that it's very much one of the most ongoing aspects of discovery regarding this iteration of Deadlock, we do have a fair bit I want to cover here since it's pretty interesting. In future episodes of Dead Leaks, there most likely will be huge developments when it comes to discoveries around the Neon Prime iterations of certain characters as we find older builds and such, but for now, here's some of the stuff we can see. 7 went through a bit of an overhaul, with him becoming more of a blatant prisoner archetype with striped clothing and leaning into a generally creepier look that would embrace stuff like a bag from an electric chair being fused to one's skull. This is a pretty obvious contrast with the sleeker orange sci-fi trooper look that he has going on when he was being called Gigawatt that comes off as this Star Wars-esque trooper you would probably see Luke Skywalker destroying hundreds of in a movie. Wraith has went through a lot of variations in the past, but most relevant in Neon Prime's case is when she was this weird ghost-handed cyborg lady that has some implications in her file name of her being some sort of crime lord, which most definitely makes sense with her current iteration nowadays, where she's this mafia type with some associations with gambling. This specific version of her somewhat reminds me of Samus Aran from the Metroid series in terms of her hairstyle and the build with the balls on her shoulder. I most definitely prefer the version of Wraith we have nowadays, and I'm happy we moved away from this general direction for her. As a quick little side note, there was seemingly a completely separate character in Neon Prime associated with cards that they just fused with Wraith in the transition between themes, which I hope we find as time passes. Neon Prime's version of Lady Geist named Ghost went into a more Japanese samurai spirit direction, taking on this cloaked figure look with this huge symbol on his back and horns. It somewhat reminds me of a sort of side villain you would see probably in some show like Samurai Jack, with like the main character fighting him as like the main villain for that episode. I really like this visual a lot actually, and I genuinely hope we see a cloaked figure like this later on in Deadlock's life, because I think something like this would actually fit the game super damn well. Infernus honestly got a huge upgrade when transitioning over to Deadlock from Neon Prime. Originally, when he was called Inferno, he had this kind of Miles Morales with Spy Kids armor type deal going on, and he looked infinitely more generic and uninteresting. I know he's supposed to be some sort of racer, but I honestly still don't like the design. Interestingly enough, when they were going to transition over to Deadlock, they had this version of Infernus with more devilish-esque features like a tail and goatee, but eventually slightly adjusted it for the more casual bartender-esque look we have now in current Deadlock. I think Infernus now is one of the most like Valve designs they've put in the game. It screams something straight out of TF2, but with a little bit of that magic that very much screams Deadlock. It's super cool and I really like it. Ivy went through probably one of the more significant changes in the game, and it was objectively for the better. Originally called Tengu, she sported this weird Eastern Demon Jet Set Radio-esque design that is not at all that great on the eyes, and is probably one of the more appalling designs compared to what is probably Deadlock's most beloved design right now. The face is just straight up ugly and clashes heavily with the color scheme going on with a jacket and blue pants. Like, holy shit, the fact we went from this to Ivy is an absolute insane glow up. Haze is probably one of the more infamous and generally beloved designs from the Neon Prime era, with her sporting this alien bunny assassin design. It actually kind of reminds me of some weird Star Wars-esque alien warrior character, and it most definitely has a cool appeal to it. I know a lot of people prefer this version to the Haze we have now, But personally speaking, I love the direction they are heading with Deadlock's Haze, and I'm excited to eventually see a polished model in game. Overall, there are some pretty interesting designs here from this era of Deadlock's development, and Neon Prime is most definitely one of the more interesting mid-development shifts Valve has had with any of their games, for the pure reason of them leaving so much of it in the semi-public version of the game. There really hasn't been something like this in regards to earlier iterations of a Valve game, even with stuff like Half-Life 2's infamous leak that showed a version of the game more focused on more 1984 inspired theming. The iterations of this game just get crazier when you talk about there being about 6 currently differently discovered versions of Neon Prime, or the strange in-between iterations of Deadlock that had stuff like these super fucking cool versions of walkers that are made out of candle wax, or the various versions of the map even before the one they are currently updating. The interesting data mining isn't going to stop anytime soon either, with the community constantly finding stuff within the files heading towards potential new mechanics like Titanfall-esque wall running, or this brand new version of Wraith that has her secondary wooden arms be more prevalent throughout her design. These kinds of discoveries are constantly being discovered, and I want to continue to cover them as we find more and more. So thank you guys for watching this first episode of Dead Leaks, the series where I will be covering data mines and uncovering cool stuff from Deadlock's past and potential future. Once again, huge thanks to the people at the Hit Modding Deadlock Discord for their constant discoveries and archiving the stuff for people to see. Genuinely, Deadlock has one of the coolest, most passionate communities around, and I love interacting with and making content for the scene. It's genuinely been some of the most fun I've had with YouTube in a long ass time, so once again, thank you all. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, comment, and subscription. It helps me a lot and lets me know you guys enjoy what I'm doing. It also lets you guys know whenever I drop something in the future, which I would highly recommend if you want to keep yourself updated with what is being discovered. But for now, this has been Sleep. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you guys next time. See ya!